Hi and welcome to School Shorts with me, Melissa Chan Green, journalist and mum of two with an interest in education. And in this episode, we're speaking with Kymyona Burk from Mississippi. It's a state that has been making headlines for its dramatic improvement in literacy instruction over the past decade. So much so it was called the Mississippi Miracle. We are just on a more recent journey here in New Zealand. So we're speaking with Kymyona about some of her insights, what has worked, what would she change. I'm sure you will get lots out of this episode. Kymyona, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been fantastic to be here.
Welcome to New Zealand. We are very lucky to be getting some of the insights that you have because Mississippi, as I said, has been on this journey a bit longer than us.
Yes.
Can you just explain your involvement and how your involvement in implementation there came to be?
Sure. In 2013, Mississippi passed a law dedicated to education reform, specifically with literacy at the center, improving reading outcomes. And so I was hired to be the state literacy director to lead the implementation of those efforts.
Why a law is quite specific.
It is.
And I guess it's a real signal. Why a law? What was the state of literacy at that time?
Well, Mississippi, like many states in the United States, have local control. So we have our local school boards that really kind of decide how things are taught in the schools. For so long as we've had our National Assessment of Educational Progress, our NAEP assessment, Mississippi has scored at or near the bottom for decades prior to us passing the law. And when our governor came on board, our new governor in 2012, he made literacy his priority. And so, the only way I feel that we could have made those changes is having that mandate to say that although we have local control, we have school boards, school districts, that there are best practices that must be in place across the board. Mm-hmm. And the law helped us do that.
So can you just explain those first steps? How did you get into it and what did it look like?
Well, I think one of the unique things about the law is that it prompted our State Department of Education to really be of service to schools and districts. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. For the most part, our state education agency had been one that, unless there were issues at the schools, unless there were audits that needed to be done, unless there were other issues with leadership, then that's when the State Department of Education would really kind of jump in. But now the State Department of Education is the agency that has the knowledge and skills, and we are going to go into schools and districts, we call it our boots on the ground effort, to provide that support, to provide that expertise. So it was extremely important for our Department of Education to build relationships with schools, and coaching was actually a really big part of great lever that we use to build those relationships. But I think it all started with our notion that we needed to improve teacher knowledge on how to teach reading.
Interesting for me as a journalist to think that, you're talking about communication and relationships and storytelling, basically. So that was actually the first steps in terms of how are we going to implement this in a way that everybody accepts and understands, I guess.
Yeah.
And what would you say is a way in which you've been bringing families and parents on board? Because I think here in New Zealand we probably have quite a mix in terms of understanding of what is happening.
Yeah. Well, leading the effort, I say to people all the time that I think my first 2 years was public relations, because we had to target our messaging. This was something completely new for the entire state and for communities. So we had to target messages to parents. We had to target specific messages to educators, right, to make sure that they all understood really kind of where we were headed. So bringing parents and families in, that was near and dear to me because my daughter at the time was in elementary school and she was in first grade when we passed the law. And of course, our law focused on reading by the end of third grade. So I was very invested not just as the leader of the initiative, but also as a parent. And we started this thing called road shows, where the Department of Education staff would go to school districts across the state. We had 8 particular places that we would go across the state. And we partnered with those school leaders in those districts and delivered the message. They were called parent nights. And the parents came to the meetings, and we had an opportunity to talk to them about the law, about the expectations that their children had, like that we had for children and for student outcomes. But most importantly, we wanted to empower parents to understand what they should be receiving. For example, our students are required to be screened 3 times per year for reading difficulties. And parents needed to know that within 30 days, you should receive your screening report. Within 30 days, you should receive a parental notification letter if your child isn't doing well. So there were so many nuances, right, around the law that we had to make it plain, and we had to make sure that parents understood how they could also partner with their child's teacher and with the school in order to help improve reading achievement.
Was there apprehension? There always is around change.
Yes. Well, I think, a lot of the apprehension was that there wasn't a lot of trust initially with the Department of Education, right? So when we begin to say, well, we're going to come into your schools and communities, they were thinking, for what? Why are you coming in? Is this going to come back to bite us in the end? So there was a lot of mistrust, but there was apprehension around our 3rd grade. At the end of 3rd grade, there is an accountability measure for an assessment that students must pass, or they will be retained, or they will be kept behind in 3rd grade if they didn't qualify for an exemption. So there was this big accountability piece that parents were even anxious about. They were asking questions like, are our teachers even prepared to get my child ready for 3rd grade? And teachers were saying, well, do we, I don't think we have enough time, right, to do this turnaround by the end of, by 3rd grade. Within 2 years was when the retention component kicked in. And so
some of this is sounding familiar.
Yes. And so for the department, we had to show that we not only want children reading by the end of 3rd grade, but we're going to help you get there. And with that messaging, and, I kind of call it like our show of force, or that we were really backing up what we were saying, that made a difference in a lot of our communities.
I'm going to skip ahead to the ending
and
kind of ruin the ending now and then come back. Has it worked?
Oh, has it worked? Listen, we always say that we still have a lot of work to do, but over the last decade, Mississippi has gone from, I mentioned the NAEP assessment before, where all states in the United States, they're representatives of their student population who take these assessments in reading, math, science, and other courses. And for 4th grade reading, in 2013, we were 49th. In the nation, again, and had been for a long time. But as of our recent national assessment in 2024, we're now 9th in the nation.
Wow.
And I think that that's important to note. But what's also important to note is that Mississippi is the poorest state in the nation, the poorest state in the United States. And for so long, there have been so many excuses about, when children come from poor, or low-income backgrounds, how there's really not an expectation that they're going to do well or under-resourced. And all of those things matter, right? So I want to be, clear that, resources matter, high-quality materials, all of those things matter. But I think what we've shown is that when you empower teachers with knowledge, like professional development and coaching, and you screen students, like you do all of these things to identify difficulties early and address them, that you can narrow these achievement gaps. So our low-income students and our Hispanic students are 1st in the nation.
Wow.
And our African-American students are 3rd in the nation when compared with their counterparts. And so the messaging is in the data. Yeah.
What, in terms of equitable education then, what strategies were used to ensure that you could get those kinds of results?
Yeah. So with our law, I mentioned that we place literacy coaches in schools. And with our strategy, we place literacy coaches in our lowest performing schools. So there's always this, conversation around what's equity and what's equality, right? Mm-hmm. Equality, of course, means that everyone just gets the same thing. Equity means that, our students, our schools get what they need in order to be successful. So we knew that one of the challenges in our lower performing schools, with the data and students being proficient, was best practices and consistencies with those best practices. So when we place literacy coaches in schools to work side by side with teachers to provide support to administrators, then we begin to see the shift and the change in best practices. Coaches were there to say, well, this is the theory behind it, but let me show you what this looks like in your classroom with your students.
So I guess the important thing there too is then knowing and being able to measure achievement in schools, because if you don't have that information,
Yes.
you don't know where to put the support.
Yes.
And there has been a lot of talk around, assessment of students and what's going to happen with that and that sort of thing. But actually I guess that's giving you the information that you can then use to put strategies around schools to make it more equitable.
Sure. I think initially when there were schools that assessed their students, right? They gave screeners. They may have done it at the beginning of the year, but they didn't follow up with maybe a middle of the year and end of year checks. So when we said that students had to be screened 3 times per year, they was like, oh my gosh, students are going to be tested too much. But the only way that you know what students need is to assess them. And the only way to know if what you're doing is working is then to reassess them, right, middle of year. And then you can begin a trend line to show whether students have progressed or whether they've regressed. And so data is the only way that you can do that. But I think a lot of times data isn't used how it should be. It shouldn't be used as to mark off a checkbox to say, okay, we've tested kids. You have to do something with it. And I think that even parents being informed, the question is always, how is your child doing? Mm-hmm. Like with all of the things, right? Socially in school and all of those, but also academically, how is your child doing? And the only way you'll know that is data. Mm-hmm. And the only way for teachers to know what they're doing is working is also the data.
Did it impact how students felt about themselves and their achievement? Is there a worry that students who then know that they're not performing, that impacts them? Or did you see that at all?
We taught students, as early as kindergarten, to understand their data. They would have little personal data sheets where they could move little animals, to show that they are going up, right? And if they were going, if they were remaining flat or if they were going down, we taught teachers how to have data talks with children.
Right.
And also having those same data talks with adults, but in a different way. The way with adults is, this is how your child is progressing, or this is what your child, has done. And these are the ways in which we're going to help your child. And these are some strategies that you can use at home. But for the children, they also knew, and they had their little data sheets, and they would know, and the teachers had those conversations because that's the goal. The goal is for them to improve and to learn more things. And so they have to be a part of the conversation as well.
What are some of the insights that you can say? I know that's a big question over a decade of learning, but what are some of the things you would pick out and say, hey, New Zealand, if we could be at the stage that you are at, this is what I would tell you?
I think one of the things for us is, our instructional materials. We passed our law in 2013, but we really didn't get into the importance of high quality instructional materials in the classroom until around 2016 or so.
So this is resources for teachers to
be able to teach, right?
Yeah,
so we had adopted new standards. We had these rigorous standards, and we felt really good about them. We had trained teachers in the science of reading, structured literacy, so they had this knowledge. They had coaches, and we began to listen to our teachers. We heard from the field that, well, now I'm going back to my classroom, and these materials reflect whole language practices, or these materials do not align with structured literacy, and these are the materials that I depend on to teach, right, my lesson, to teach my students. And so then we had this kind of statewide initiative around adopting high quality instructional materials, or looking at the materials that you have, evaluating those, and to see where the gaps are. Maybe there are materials that are not really heavy in vocabulary instruction or in phonics instruction. And so how do we fill those gaps? And then ultimately it was, instead of piecemealing things together, let's adopt a curricula that has all of these things included, like no brainer, right? And so I think that high quality instructional materials we could have brought into the conversation a bit earlier. But I also think that because it was from the ground up, because there were teachers that were saying we need these materials, that it made it much more impactful. And I think the other thing I would say is educator preparation programs, our universities, who prepare our teachers.
Teacher training schools.
Teacher training schools. We spend a lot of money on training teachers who are now in service, who are in classrooms. And just imagine where that money could have been better spent if those teachers already knew this when they exited, right, their preparation, their training programs. Money could have been spent on coaching or materials or other things. And so
the follow-up kind of training programs and the professional development that teachers are doing after they've been in the teaching profession, you're saying make that part of the training.
Yes.
And then the money that goes into that, other professional development gets spent elsewhere.
Yeah, but you always want teachers to continue to develop professionally, right? But then that's not teaching them from scratch, right? That's ensuring that they stay up to date on the latest research and those things, instead of starting from scratch with a teacher who has already spent, in the United States, 4 years at university, right, to train to become a teacher. And then now, when they get into the classroom, now we have to train them again, because maybe they didn't learn structured literacy under their in their institution. So I think educator preparation is something that we've brought to the conversation now, and that we have partnerships with our universities, and they understand how important it is to begin to align their coursework to the science of reading and structured literacy prior to candidates exiting their programs.
At what point did you start to see real results? How long does that take to then see that there's a difference here in terms of our literacy rates?
Well, I think that's the $1 million question. And it varies. And it varies because I think for Mississippi, we began to see some improvement very early on, after maybe the first 2 years. With our national assessment, we increased about 5 skill score points after the first 2 years. And I think that was because of our effort to bring the entire state along, right, instead of different pockets. It was our effort. We had literacy coaches in our lowest performing schools, but we still had the messaging for everyone in the state. We also had the infrastructure. At our Department of Education, we had a new state superintendent of education, and my office was dedicated to implementing all things literacy.
This would have cost a lot of money too, right? Was Mississippi flush with money, or was it just a reprioritization?
Let me reemphasize that we are the poorest state in the nation still. No, I think that it was our legislature appropriated $15 million. It was $9.5 million the first year, and it's been $15 million every year since, to the literacy efforts, specifically to the Department of Education, to implement these efforts across the state. The money wasn't given directly to schools. Let me tell you why. Because schools then will have choice, right? They will have a lot of choice about what they decided as far as professional development, or what they decided as far as, regarding screeners. So I think that this approach was best for us, so that we could determine and provide guidance on the best ways to utilize those funds. So yeah, it wasn't a lot of money compared to what some of the other states are spending, $100 million or $50 million for this, but we were able to specifically identify the areas that we wanted to target, which was our parents and families, providing resources for them, for our students, providing interventions and screening them, and then, of course, for our educators, making sure they had professional development and coaching.
How did you bring educators along on the vision of narrowing down choice?
Well, I think it was more along the lines of the school boards, when I mentioned the local control. And it also was when we said we're going to have to let our work speak for us. When we went into schools, again, there were teachers who were so accustomed to using the materials that they were using, but then we had to show them that there was a better way. Some materials are so daunting. Like, it takes so long for teachers to get all of the materials together to teach one lesson. So we had to show them that with high quality instructional materials, right, you have all of these things that are there for you. The planning is a lot easier. And so it really took word of mouth in some instances, but also data in others. When some schools began to see schools that had historically underperformed, that they were doing well, then they started asking, okay, so what's happening over there? Like, what's happening in that school? And that is truly how we brought some of the other schools along with our successes in some of our schools that has historically underperformed.
What do you think of the phrase Mississippi miracle? Do you think it has been a miracle?
It definitely has not been a miracle. Listen, when we first heard that phrase, we were like, what? Not all of this hard work we've done, us, like you snap your fingers and it just happened. I think that, I say to people sometimes, like, had I not lived it and led it, right, I'd be skeptical about it too. But I think it seems to the world that this just kind of happened overnight, but it didn't. It was, I think I always talk about the big three. It was our governor who, at the time, our former governor, he's dyslexic. And it was our state superintendent, it was our legislature, and all coming together at the same time, at the right time, on the right issue. I call that the perfect storm, but it wasn't a miracle because there was so much hard work. And when everyone else began to hear about it in 2019, we were already 6 years in with the work. And we've just been able to continue on this journey of improvement since then. But it's unlikely. It's unlikely that you have the poorest state in the nation with at least 50% of their students who are Black minority students to achieve what we have achieved over the course of the last 12 years.
Why do you think that for those minority students particularly, why has it been so successful for them? What is it about this way of instruction that has achieved not a miracle, but hard work that has led to success?
Explicit instruction. I think about, and I'm not a sports person. I didn't play sports. I love to watch sports. But when you think about if a child is learning how to play, let's just say baseball for the first time, and how the coach actually comes to the child, stands with the child, teaches him or her how to hold the bat, teaches them how to stand, how to position their legs, right? This is what was missing for our students, not just our minority students, but also for all of our students, that explicit instruction and not relying on pictures or relying on whole language. And I think that teachers were teaching the best they knew how. So we never blame teachers, right? They were teaching the best they knew how at the time. And there was not this concerted effort to introduce them to the research or to show them anything differently. Because in the U.S., the National Reading Panel Report was released in 2000. And it was not until 2013, right, did Mississippi begin to say, okay, we want to arm our teachers with the research on how to best teach reading. And so I think that made all the difference, the way that students were, again, and caught early. We shouldn't have to wait until students are in third grade to find out that they have a reading difficulty. We were able to do that now in kindergarten with mandating those types of screeners.
On a personal level for you, to be involved in something like this and to see your daughter go through the system as this was happening, how does it feel?
I mean, this has been, I say that this has been the greatest challenge of my life. But also, I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do it in my home state. I'm grateful for the work that we've done that has changed the trajectory of the lives of so many children in our state, because now they're literate, right? And in some cases, they've broken generational curses where their parents aren't literate, right? Or their grandparents. So I'm proud. I'll say that I'm proud to have done this work, and now to continue supporting other states across the nation who have adopted literacy laws or who are looking to adopt laws to begin this shift in their states.
Yeah, well, we do have listeners in the US. We also have listeners across Australia and, of course, New Zealand and other countries. What would your message be, finally, to those countries and states who are considering going on this path?
Well, I'll say find your people first. There are others who are, at home or in schools who know that there has to be something better, right, for kids to increase their achievement. And so I'll say find your people, build a coalition, right, find a champion, especially if you're thinking of legislating this, find a champion for that. And then focus on stakeholder awareness. Because a lot of time people can't get behind what they don't know, what they really don't understand. So focus on your communications plan, right? Make sure that you're getting the message out about the importance of it and how it can impact a child's life. I start with my staff, with my coaches, and I was telling them about even teaching. We're partly responsible for who they turn out to be, for who our students turn out to be, right? And that's heavy. What we do every day helps to shape their future. It helps to ensure that they have an access to a quality way of life, that they can vote, they can advocate for themselves, like with their health and wellness, all of those things. And it's because of what we do, how we show up in classrooms every day. So no small feat, but I think that the Mississippi story has been so impactful because there are many who are saying, well, gosh, if it can happen in Mississippi, right, it can happen here. So if we've given others hope, then we're doing our job.
Well done. Congratulations on your work. You should be proud, and I'm sure you've inspired others to continue on this path if they are too. Thank you very much, Kymyona Burk, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. If that topic was helpful for you and you'd like to hear more, please do like and subscribe. It sends me that feedback. School Shorts is all about supporting busy parents who want their children to thrive. Follow on social at School Shorts NZ for fun ideas, helpful resources, and exclusive giveaways.